Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to Reset Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in Political Science we will be starting with the series on Indian political thought. Today will be the introductory lecture. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert Dr. Marendranath Thakur. Dr. Thakur is Associate Professor in Center for Political Studies, School of Social Sciences, JNU. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, Sir.
Thank you. I will talk about the way or the approach with which we need to study Indian political thought, particularly the Indian political thought in the modern times, in the modern period. It is also called modern Indian political thought. In a minute, we will talk about what does modern mean in this case. But let me put a subtitle to this larger topic called modern Indian political thought. I want to put the subtitle as Tradition, Modern and Swaraj. I want to bring this idea of Swaraj, and that will be my highlight. I would argue that we must approach this set of ideas with a key idea that is called Swaraj, and we can call it, as K.C. Bhattacharya, one of the thinkers in the modern times, has said, Swaraj in ideas. Let me make a general point first and introduce you to this idea of Swaraj in ideas and how to approach Indian political thought. The first general point is how to study philosophy. I think one point we must keep in mind that gone are the days when we thought philosophy basically means Western philosophy. Now, almost everybody accepts that human beings, wherever they are located, they have produced philosophy. As they are a reflexive being, they reflect on their existence, their self, their engagement with the nature, and their engagement with other human beings. And once you do that, you produce some kind of philosophy. It is altogether a different question. What is the mode of expression of philosophy? Sometimes the mode of expression of philosophy is poetry, sometimes novel, sometimes even anecdotal stories, sometimes some kind of narrative which you may not find very coherent, but they all contain philosophy. So philosophy, as a very structured, logical, argumentative enterprise, is a kind of concept that emerged in the West, but not necessarily that one can reduce every form of writing philosophy into this particular form of prose. Having said that, I would argue that with this particular kind of prose, what we did, we actually rejected all other kinds of prose, all other kinds of writings which contain certain philosophy as tradition. And we said that they are traditions, they could be myths, they could be stories, they could be anything, but not philosophy. And therefore, philosophy became a modern Western enterprise, or something that emerged in the Greek society, or which was at its climax in Greek society. I am going to argue that in fact, this is very Eurocentric idea, and we have to go beyond that, and we have to consider what you call as tradition also as philosophy. These are different kinds of philosophies, different forms of philosophies, and then I would suggest how do we approach this modern philosophy and philosophies of any kind in the world, and the approach I suggest is a Swaraj in idea approach. Let me make a point about what is modern. Is it a time concept? Means whatever is happening in the contemporary times is called modern, or is it an epistemic concept? In fact, it is an epistemic concept, which means that it has a kind of theory of knowledge. What is the theory of knowledge of the modern? The theory of the knowledge of the modern is that one has to conform to the epistemology of the modern science. That is, knowledge, if you want to claim something as knowledge, you have to accept that it grows from observation, experimentation, and confirmation and theorization. All these things have to be there. So if you see some regularity, if you observe some regularity, then you create a hypothesis that this could be a general principle, and then you experiment that in different circumstances, and if your experiment proves the hypothesis, then you create a theory, and once you create a theory, the theory has a universal claim. That is the modern epistemic frame, and that's very powerful, no doubt about it. It is so powerful that it invaded almost in every discipline, every realm of knowledge. The modern, in this sense, influenced literature. It influenced the study of consciousness, not only the study of physics, but also the study of human nature. It became widespread, and it was almost accepted widely. So any knowledge which was not conforming to this epistemic frame, that became a myth, that became a tradition, a traditional knowledge. And once it is traditional knowledge, it means that it is also inferior knowledge, and it has to compete with, if it has to compete with modern, then it has to conform to the episteme of the modern. My argument is that if human beings are reflexive, if they are reflexive being, if they have a mind which is creative, and they try to reflect on the reality and then accumulate that consciousness, then there has to be certain element of truth in that. Maybe the element of truth is not confirmed. Maybe the element of truth is tentative, but nobody can deny that there is an element of truth. Now, if we acknowledge that element of truth, then we will agree that there could be multiple forms of knowledge, and the episteme that the science is claiming may not be the only episteme through which we can claim something as knowledge. Critical realism, a philosophy that is emerging as one of the very powerful philosophies. Roy Bhaskar suggests in this philosophy that reality is multi-layered, ontologically multi-layered, and for each layer of reality there could be different kind of epistemologies, different kind of theory of knowledge. Now, reducing all kind of ontology to one form of ontological understanding, that is modern science, would be difficult. And if you want to use the epistemology of modern science for all layers of ontology, that would also be self-defeating. Therefore, I would suggest that instead of treating these traditions as a kind of time frame thing and in the process of evolution, let us treat them as competing epistemologies, as competing theories of knowledge. So, what I want to do is, instead of putting them into hierarchy, I want to put them on the parallel ground, so that now today, with the questions that we have, we can engage with them, and then we can get answers, relevant answers for ourselves. The consequence of this would be that all questions may not be answered by the modernity. There are questions which have been answered better in certain other philosophical traditions. So we must approach them for looking for solutions in the contemporary times. That is the idea. And if I say that, that also means two things. One is what is commonly said, decolonizing the mind. You know what has happened in the last 200 years or so, that this modern episteme has become so powerful that it has controlled almost everybody's imagination. So the moment we talk of knowledge, the moment we talk of truth, in the subconscious we acknowledge this modern as the most powerful, as the only way of knowing the truth. And this actually produced what we call the colonizing mind. Means it was not only colonization of countries geographically or colonizing their economy, but also the thought process. The autonomous thought process that a population of any region of the world was having before advent of colonial power in that area, or before advent of this frame of thinking in that region, they were almost rejected, and this became the most important way of thinking. So the autonomy of thinking we lost. The people who are in the colonial period, they lost the autonomy of thinking. And not only we, even in the advanced countries, in the colonial power, the countries of colonial power, there also, I think, people lost their autonomy, those who were making certain arguments differently. Let me give you an example to make this point before I move on. There was a person called Russell Velas, who was the co-author of Darwin. In fact, he wrote a letter to Darwin in which he explained about the theory of origin of species. And Darwin, who was working for long on that, he was really disturbed by that, in the sense that he thought that probably Russell Velas had discovered this much before Darwin. But Darwin's friends put these articles together and got them published. And Darwin's article became the first, and Velas's article became the second article. So what I want to say is that Velas was almost an equivalent thinker to Darwin. But then the story goes on, and Velas, after some time, writes to Darwin that, look, Darwin, we have discovered the evolution of the body, human body, that we have got the linkages of the evolution of human body, but we have not been able to discover the linkages in the evolution of human mind. But there is no parallel to human mind which we can connect as if human mind has grown from this step to the next step. And Darwin wrote back saying that human mind is too complicated, I do not want to get into it. Now, Velas, after this, wrote a book about, in fact, the mysteries of human mind, but he was completely pushed in the background. So anybody who was not thinking, even in the West, with that epistemic frame, lost that kind of acknowledgement, and they were more or less dropped from the history of ideas. And I call this colonizing the mind. So what I am suggesting is that maybe this modern science is very powerful, maybe the episteme is very powerful, but how the humanity will go to the next stage if we stop them from thinking new ideas, from bringing new ideas, from challenging the dominant perspective which is there today. It is entirely possible if we accept the right to think beyond the given frameworks, and that is what is Swaraj of ideas. So the second thing is the mimicry, cognitive mimicry. Colonization has a process of colonizing the idea, the mind also, and that produced cognitive mimicry in the sense that idea produced by one community in one society at one historical juncture have been mimicked by other societies through their educational institutions and writings, books and all. Consequently, what has happened is human beings have lost their capacity to think in an autonomous way. There is a frame of thinking that is so powerful, it has become an iron cage within and very difficult to go beyond in terms of institutions, in terms of politics, in terms of science, in terms of psychology, in terms of writings. So this frame has to be changed, and the time probably has come. And this is from where I want to take you to the idea that why should we study the modern Indian political thought, if we want to call it modern Indian political thought, as modern in this sense is time, not the episteme. The time during the freedom struggle of India, a certain set of ideas were produced. And this set of ideas is very powerful. It has been very powerful. And the power comes from the creativity. Since the thinkers, the human beings who were leading at the time, they were capable of breaking the boundaries of thought. And since they were capable of breaking the boundaries of thought, they created new ideas. And there are seeds of new ideas there which can be further explored. And therefore I call it Swaraj, a good phase in the Swaraj in ideas. And why do we need to access this now? And not only we means not the Indians, and it is not a nationalist project. Not that since these ideas are indigenous ideas, therefore we need to accept that. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that the problems that humanity is facing in the contemporary times cannot be solved by the ideas produced by modernity or the modern episteme. And therefore, we need to engage with set of ideas produced in these moments of crisis in different societies. Maybe, I'm not sure, maybe the solutions of the problems that we are facing today in the world, we can get from there. But they broke the consensus. They broke the hegemony. They challenged the hegemonic dominance of the Western ideas, the idea that it was a white man's burden to civilize the world. Thinkers at that time stood up and said that this is not civilizing, this is decivilizing. In fact, it was against civilization. They could say that, they could dare to say that. So they broke the consensus that emerged in the modern times. It was the first time in the world, and probably the best possible way, thinkers in India challenged the dominant perspective coming from the modern societies. And there are many people now arguing that the set of ideas known as modern ideas emerged in Europe at the time are reaching to their end, to its end. And this is the end of the time. And the European modernity is in deep crisis. And the crisis of many kinds. But the most essential crisis is the crisis of the framework of thinking that Descartes generated with the help of his formulation about the mind-body duality. And therefore, the West has developed science quite a bit. It has measured every smallest possible particle. However, it is still struggling to understand consciousness, human nature, complexities of human nature, the issues of ethics, morality, emotions. These are the things that probably they have not been able to address properly. And therefore, and this is what the lack of understanding these things brings huge amount of crisis in the modern times. It contributes to the crisis in the modern times. How do we come out from this crisis? To come out from this crisis, we have to reclaim, and non-European societies will have to reclaim, and they have to reclaim in order to counter this hegemonic dominance and counter this cognitive mimicry. They have to reclaim the process of linkages between being, thinking, and knowing. What is happening is when you're doing the mimicry, the cognitive mimicry, you in fact delink them completely. The knowledge is something which is given to you in the textbooks. You mug that up, appear in the exam, talk about that, but that does not guide your life. So what we need to reclaim is thinking about our being and then theorize that being and treat that as knowledge, and that knowledge is more authentic, maybe more useful. But this is the time when this is possible. And my assertion is that these thinkers like Gandhi, Ambedkar, Phule, Tagore, Vivekananda, these thinkers at that time of crisis could reclaim this relationship between being, thinking and knowing. And that reclamation allowed them to think afresh, and therefore they produced a lot of alternative ideas, new institutions, new ways of organizing your society, new ways of organizing education, new ways of organizing human relationships. I am not sure that whatever they produced that time that got matured after independence. I think after independence we were back to the cognitive mimicry in a way, and we are facing the consequences of that today, and that demands that we must go back to these thinkers, engage with them more seriously, find out what they were doing, find out what alternatives they were suggesting, so that we can provide some solutions, some future philosophy to the world as a whole and to India particularly. Therefore, the question that then is, if we agree with this point that we need to study these things, the question then is that how to study and how not to study. And let me begin with how not to study Indian political thought, modern Indian political thought. There are two frameworks, dominant frameworks, that has been used for understanding, to engaging with modern Indian thought. One framework, I call it tradition modernity framework. And one of the major exponents of this framework is Professor Bhikhu Parekh, Lord Bhikhu Parekh. Very powerful writings, but I do not agree with the frame, and I think there is a problem with it, that if you start looking at this set of philosophy produced by Indian thinkers as their effort to mitigate the difference between the modernity and tradition, or their effort to traditionalizing the modernity, or their effort to engaging with modernity from traditional point of view, being critical traditionalist or critical modernist. What we are doing is we are kind of creating a frame which may not give us any answer to the question that we have. It may give us some understanding. I do not deny that modernity and tradition was a kind of issue at the time. Must have been, I'm sure. But if you look at them from this lens, that whether Gandhi was modern or a traditionalist, whether Ramakrishna was modern or a traditionalist, whether Nehru was modern or a traditionalist. So you want to kind of create this binary and put them here and there and some gray space in between. So this is a futile project for me. I will not gain anything out of it, except that I will be able to categorize the whole set of thinkers into either modernity or tradition or in between somewhere. And then I may commit a mistake of treating Gandhi as a religious reformer, as Parekh has done. I do not think Gandhi was a religious reformer at all. He was not a reformer. I think he was a revolutionary who was trying to use all possible resources at his disposal. And he had no commitment to the resources. He had commitment to the change. So resources he used and threw, not bothered about that, transformed the resources to the extent that he could, used them to the extent that he could, and went beyond that. So when Parekh says whether people were confused whether he was a sannyasi or a sansari, I think that is not the question. This binary is not important. Gandhi created a new category which combined many things of sannyasi and sansari, and it was a political category. Gandhi, above all, was a politician. He was not a sannyasi, he was not a sansari, He was a politician. So a new kind of political category he created. Probably the world needs today that kind of political category which Gandhi performed and which Gandhi suggested by adopting something from here and something from there. We will miss that out if we try to capture Gandhi within modernity or tradition. The second approach is the East-West tradition, East-West framework. That is Partha Chatterjee and company. That whether these people created original ideas, indigenous ideas, or they copied from there. Whether this discourse was derivative discourse or not, or indigenous discourse, original discourse. I think this is a futile idea. I don't think it will take us anywhere, even if we know it was derivative or not. I think the question for thinkers in the modern India was that whether we can create a philosophy which could be used for liberation from colonialism and from other structures of domination. That was the issue. East and West were not his issue. It is the issue, not their issue. It is the issue for the nation state, maybe nationalism, but not for liberation. Even for nation, it is not a major issue. I think ideas have migrated from one place to other, always. And human beings have produced new ideas in different parts of the world, and human beings in different other parts of the world have appropriated that, used that for their own benefit. This is nothing, there is nothing new in this. So if we get into this idea of trying to think whether they were indigenous or not indigenous, I think that might not give us much from this kind of framework. If we want to know how to study these ideas in the modern times, I mean, once I argue that we should not study the ideas of thinkers in the modern Indian period as in the framework of East and West or in the framework of modernity and tradition, then the question is that how should we study? And I want to propose the Swaraj Framework to study, as I said in the beginning. The Swaraj Framework of study has the first thing that it aims at decolonizing the mind, that we must get beyond that kind of powerful domination by the epistemic frame, which is called the modern epistemic frame. And also, we must get out of cognitive mimicry. How do we get out of these things? I think we will be able to get out of it if we prioritize the project of universal human liberation. Let me take a couple of minutes to suggest what is this project of universal human liberation. The project of liberation is very simple, that we as a species being have certain potentials, certain kind of things we can do, and we can actually enjoy our existence. So if we get the freedom to do that, if we get support to do that, we will realize our species being. We will be non-alienated human being. Now, any structure which stops us from experiencing ourselves as the highest possible species being, the qualities of the species being, these are called structures of domination. So, structures of domination stops human beings from realizing the self of the species being. That is the highest potential of ourselves as human being. Now, liberation would mean breaking those structures of domination. It's very simple. And the structures of domination are not one. It may be many, 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 and many more, and many, many more when you start looking for them. At some stage, it could be caste, class, gender, religion, maybe color, maybe language. So there are many structures of domination, multiple structures of domination. There could be certain primary contradictions in given time and space, which might change in different given time and space. But we must agree that in the process of progress of human society, we continuously keep producing these toxic structures. I call them toxic structures. They stop us from experiencing our real existence. So liberation would mean a continuous process of demolishing these structures of domination so that we realize ourselves. And the universal means for every human being in every part of the world. And not only the human being, but also other living being, as Buddha would say. All living beings and also the non-living beings, we must agree that they have right to exist, and the structures we produce, the toxic elements we produce and keep producing, take that right away. So human beings have this moral responsibility, as they are the best thinking being, they are the reflexive being, to preserve the nature, to preserve the humanity, to preserve the living beings, to preserve the forest. And so we have to continuously struggle and struggle and struggle to break all structures of domination. We have to eliminate all toxic elements from the universe so that we experience our best possible potential, that is, experiencing the self. Now, this is a very broad category, I know, but this is where one can then go on talking about the particulars. In the colonial period, for instance, what is the most important contradiction? It was the colonial power appropriating all surplus from here and creating dehumanizing structures. We have to break that, and therefore there was a struggle to break that. We have experienced the caste system, massive structure of domination produced in India, and we are struggling to break that. People have experienced racism in Europe and America. They have struggled to break that. So these struggles are part of the universal human liberation. And the thinkers who are involved in these exercises are thinkers of liberation. And thinkers of liberation cannot say they are in favor of liberation of one caste, one race, one class or something. If he or she is a thinker of liberation, there is a particular context in which he or she is thinking, of course, but at the same time, since they are thinking for the liberation of one, they have to think for the liberation of all. They cannot say that Gandhi cannot say that, well, I am interested in liberation of Indians, but domination of rest of the world. Just can't say that. Therefore, all these thinkers have universal project of liberation. If we accept that, then we have to accept also that there could be certain kind of differences among these thinkers when they were carrying on their project, but in the larger context, in the larger project of universal human liberation, these differences are minor differences, even if they were having that. There is a possibility of engaging in a dialogue with them to find out what could be the solution of the differences that they had. It is possible if we shift our goalpost. If the goalpost is not only fight against the caste or fight against colonialism, if the goalpost is universal liberation, then I am sure that such dialogues are possible. And for that, what we need to do is, we need to read these thinkers not historically, but philosophically. What are the philosophical points that they have made? Historically, if we see, we will find that there was a major difference in Gandhi and Ambedkar. And in fact, the identity politics of today, the Gandhians and Ambedkars have kept fighting. Ambedkarites have kept fighting. Now, this fight has no legitimacy if you want to create a universal human liberation, the project of universal human liberation. Now, there are some thinkers like Gopal Guru suggesting that these debates were contextual. There is an ethics of Ambedkar's critique of Gandhi, and that ethics comes from this universal project of human liberation. That we have to understand. So, we have to read them philosophically. And again, the other thing that we have to understand the method through which they have read the other philosophers. Look at the method, look at Gandhi, how Gandhi has understood Gita. What does he say in that? He says that, well, I am not interested in who wrote Gita and when he wrote Gita. I am not interested in what was the politics of the time. I am interested in the ideas that Gita can give us to fight against colonialism, as simple as that. And I am interested only in those slokas which can give me these ideas. Ambedkar engages with Buddhism, not interested in history of Buddhism too much. He is interested in the philosophy of Buddhism, which he says is an egalitarian philosophy, which he says is an argumentative, rational philosophy. So we must understand the way these creative thinkers have engaged with their own predecessors, their own philosophy, the philosopher of previous generations. We have to use the same method to understand these thinkers also. That is extremely important. And therefore, we must ask our own questions to them. I am sure Gandhi, Ambedkar, Tagore, everybody had their own questions at that time. Maybe those questions are not our questions. With the time and space, questions have changed. So we have to ask our own questions to them, and we have to get answers from them. Not sure that they have answer to all the questions we have. They can't have it, because they have not thought, that they did not face those questions. But maybe we will get some clues. Maybe we will get some insights from there. And therefore, understanding their context, understanding them in their context is not a necessary condition. It may be a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. We have to understand them in their context, of course, but we have to understand them in our context. In our context, how do we engage with them? Our generations and the future generations may have new set of questions, entirely new set of questions. As the technology has changed the world today, there are new ethical questions that we are facing. Gandhi never faced the question emerging out of WhatsApp and Facebook groups. We are facing this question. We have to ask these questions to Gandhi. Maybe Gandhi doesn't have an answer, Maybe Gandhi has an insight that we have to capture and expand further. So we have to know our problem fairly well, and we have to expand the horizon of thinking constantly. Expanding the horizon of thinking would mean that me, my society, my nation, the universe, the humanity, the universe, and all this. If you keep expanding your horizon of thinking, you will keep raising new questions. And those new questions, if we ask these thinkers, we get new answers. Those answers may not be very, very clear, very well articulated, but they may have very interesting insights, as they were creative thinkers. And we have to build up new philosophy on the basis of those insights. There are three layers in which we should think. There is a layer of empirical, where we encounter the reality, where we encounter the forces of domination, where we encounter the structures of domination, and we want to break that. This is a very empirical layer. Then there is a theoretical layer. Beyond that, beyond the empirical layer, there is a theoretical layer where we are linking with the concepts, we are playing with the concepts, using concepts and categories, trying to develop some abstract theories to explain our reality, so that we can transform the reality. The explanation is not only for explanation, the explanation is for transformation of the reality. And there could be a philosophical layer, more universal questions, and I am sure, as far as philosophical questions are concerned, many of them have faced similar philosophical questions. Humanity all over the world have certain universal philosophical concerns, and sometimes one concern becomes very important, sometimes other concern becomes very important, but some concerns are quite universal for the human beings. And when engaging with them, we have to take that to that layer also, the engagement to that layer also. So we have to engage at the layer of empirical, we have to engage at the layer of theoretical, and we have to engage at the layer of philosophical. This engagement with them is necessary. Not only the historical, contextual, what happened when Gandhi said what, when Ambedkar said what, when somebody wrote to whom, and what words they used, what kind of abuses thinkers used against each other. I think these are not very important things. What is important is the questions we have, the way they are answering our questions, whether we are satisfied with that or not. Maybe one question answered in three different ways, and there are three different elements which we need to combine to get our own answer today. That is the exercise we have to undertake, which I think is a creative engagement. With the creative engagement, in the creative engagement, we have to constantly break the boundaries created by certain frame of thinking. Constantly engage and break, and as the time and space changes, the previous framework becomes very powerful, starts dominating. We need to break the previous framework, create a new framework, demolish that too, create yet another new framework. A constant growth of thinking, a constant creative engagement is necessary. Let me give a frame more useful, a more lucid frame to do what I am suggesting. That pick up a thinker, pick up his or her context, see what were the problems that they were facing in their own context, and then see what method they used to solve that problem, what resources they used to solve those problems, and then see what kind of theories they produced after that. And go back to the problem and see to what extent these theories could solve the problems that they were having. They can't solve the problem 100%, there must be some unfinished projects. And then you again go back to your own context and see what are the problems you are facing, and then see what are the resources you have and to what extent you can use the method that they have used. Do you need to innovate the method also? Possibly, you must. But the innovations can be done over what they have already done. So this is the process of thinking and engaging with them. Look at their own method, evolve your own method. Look at their method and evolve your own method. That is the key to engaging with them. So if you share their problem, some parts of the problem, and then you see how they solve that problem, you may get insight to solve your problem also. See their theories, see their models, see their methods, see their concepts, categories, and do not become dogmatic about them. Do not start thinking that they are final things. I think you have to engage with them, you have to appropriate them according to your own necessity. This is what I call Swaraj in idea approach to modern Indian thought. So go beyond the category, go beyond the tradition modernity dichotomy, create new resources, engage with old resources, create new philosophy. See if they can explain part of your problem. If they can't, dump them and go ahead, create new ideas, appropriate from somewhere else, appropriate from thinkers from anywhere in the world, and that is what will allow you to think afresh, that is what will allow you to emerge as a philosopher in the contemporary times. The purpose of yours should be purpose of yours should not be merely knowing the history of what happened. I mean, that may be a very big enterprise in itself. But my suggestion is the purpose is to think as they are thinking, provide new philosophies, provide solutions to the problems that you are facing. Why I am saying all this, why I think this idea, this model of Swaraj in ideas is a very powerful model, and we must adopt this. I think you look at anywhere, anything, even in science. There is a very interesting scientist called Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was contemporary of Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was using all technology, and he was a great innovator, and particularly he was expert in converting principles, scientific principles into technology. But he was using all technology to earn more and more money. Tesla did not have that concern. What was Tesla's concern? Tesla's concern was humanity. He was suggesting that science should be at the service of humanity. It should not be used to earn surplus, to appropriate surplus. Tesla's very interesting project was one of the projects. In fact, Tesla has even now the highest number of patents in his name. One of the projects was providing free electricity. He was working on that. Between Tesla and Edison, there was a big conflict. Edison introduced what you know as DC current. Tesla introduced what is now known as AC current. And Edison used to say that Tesla's model will take human life as it can give shocks to human beings. But then finally, Tesla prevailed. But many of his projects could not be completed. Now, one of his disciples or followers or a great fan called Elon Musk is now arguing that the artificial intelligence is going to be a reality in next few years. If it becomes reality, then there will be a big danger for humanity if it is not available equally to every human being. Now, this is the problem today. Suppose I want to answer to this and I want to go back to Gandhi and Ambedkar and talk to them. What to do if something called artificial intelligence has come I am sure that it was not an issue for Gandhi or Ambedkar. Artificial intelligence was not at all an issue for Gandhi and Ambedkar. But if you want to go back to them and ask them that, look, artificial intelligence is coming and something will happen to us, what shall we do? Get the principle from Gandhi. Says that when you are thinking, think for the lowest of the low. So if you are getting a new technology, think for it, how the lowest of the low will be influenced by it, and how to make the influence in a way that it does not create further structure of domination. That is the point. So I think that if you adopt this way of engaging with them, they will not become redundant thinkers. They may not be they may not be able to give all answers to your questions, but I am sure you will be able to appropriate the insights that they have, insights which are very relevant for humanity, for the liberation of humanity, for human beings realizing their species being. These insights we have to capture. This is the method through which we need to really understand and engage with these thinkers. Thank you very much.
Sir, we have a call from Gorakhpur.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is
अच्छा, हाँ जी, अपना सवाल कीजिए.
why do we need to study political theory?
Yes.
Why do we need to study political theory?
Why do we need to study political theory?
Yes, ma'am.
That's your question?
Okay, I think
what?
That's your question, sir?
Ma'am, question हो गया.
Okay.
Why do we
need to study political theory?
See, I think that human beings are theory building beings, and they have made theories. They have made theories about politics. Now, if you want to do anything in politics, we have to have certain kind of model, certain kind of idea, certain kind of set of ideas through which we can understand what might happen. So you develop these generalizations. The generalizations would help you in organizing your things around. Like if you know that, well, the nature of a state is such, the theory of the state suggests that the nature of the state is such that it will resolve the conflicts between human beings. Suppose it's a liberal theory of the state. If you accept that, if you go with that assumption, then if you want to resolve a conflict somewhere, what would you do? You will approach the state. How do you approach the state? You will go to the judiciary. So you need a theory to understand how your world is being organized around yourself. Maybe your theory is wrong, then the consequences will be wrong. So you need to generate new theory. So human beings are theory building beings. We keep building theories even in our everyday life. If you engage with somebody and then you find that the person is not good, then you develop a theory, okay, this person is not good. And next time when you meet, you do not want to engage him further. The same kind of thing you do about the state, about other things, about the interstate relationships, about the international relationships. So theory is very essential as far as our method of understanding and engaging with the world goes.
Sir, if I can add one more element to this political theory, the difference between theory and thought. Sir, if you can probably elaborate on that.
Theory is more of a kind of generalized statement about something. And it has to be concrete. It has to be an element of observation and prediction. Element of. I am not saying that we can have hard theory. In fact, we cannot have very hard theory even in science now. But there is an element of this kind in theory. So if I am saying that the theory of a state suggests, or liberal theory of a state suggests that the role of the state is to resolve the conflict between the competing parties in society, right? Now it may not happen in every case. There are many ifs and buts in that, right? But when it comes to thought is more generalized reflections on something. So very general reflection about the state. what is the state? So I'll say state seems to be a kind of a legitimate power, right? And I will keep reflecting on that. So thought is more reflexive, much more reflexive, and theory is a step further. When out of the reflexive things, we carve out a certain kind of predictive element, right? So that's the difference. And also thought could be more individualistic, and theory could be more general. It's a kind of widely accepted theory. It has to be accepted by the community of intellectuals. Thought may not be. You may not. I have a political thought. You may accept it. You may not accept it. But this is my thought. If I say this is my theory, then my duty is to prove that my theory is sustainable, and the proof has to be accepted by the community of intellectuals.
Okay. I hope with that your question has been answered. On that note, dear friends, we would like to thank Dr. Thakur for coming to our show and delivering this wonderful lecture, and thank you, dear friends, for watching this lecture. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.